So a few years when you open a document like a web page or even just a physical book, you probably think you're reading it, right?
That's the standard assumption.
You assume your eyes just naturally start at the top left corner, and you digest the first word, and then you dutifully march across the page line by line.
Absorbing the information exactly as the author intended.
Exactly. But you aren't. Let's be real, human beings don't actually read. At least, not right away.
We really don't. We scan.
Right. We behave a lot more like predators hunting for prey. Our eyes just sort of dart frantically across the whole visual landscape.
Looking for a focal point?
Yes, looking for a keyword or an anchor or, a bold headline, something to grab onto.
And only after our brain has quickly mapped that terrain and decided that it actually holds something of value, do we actually settle down to read.
It's wild, and that fundamental psychological reality is basically the secret engine driving all visual communication.
It absolutely is. Because if you fail to understand that predatory scanning behavior, your audience will just abandon your document.
Right, before they ever process a single word of your text.
Exactly.
So today, we're going to show you how to build the invisible maps that control that exact psychological behavior. Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Glad to be here for this one.
Our mission today is unpacking Chapter 9 of this incredibly insightful book, Graphic Design for Dummies.
That's a great resource.
It really is. And the chapter is called Creating Grid Systems and Page Layouts. We're taking the insights from this source material, everything from the strict anatomy of a printed page to the fluid nature of digital design.
And we are extracting the underlying mechanics of it all.
Right. We want to demystify grid systems for any novice designer listening. We want to transform what looks like rigid, boring math into a framework for just ultimate creative freedom.
Because that transition is huge.
Sure.
Going from staring at a blank canvas with a sense of, overwhelming anxiety.
Oh, the blank page panic.
Yes, going from that to looking at a structured grid with a sense of infinite possibility. It's a profound paradigm shift.
It really is. But hey, before we completely dismantle the illusion of the printed page and show you the matrix underneath, I want to ask a quick favor.
Go for it.
If you find these deep dives valuable, if they help you connect the dots in your own work, or if you're just curious about how the world is put together, please take a second to support the channel.
It really does make a difference.
It does. Liking, subscribing, sharing this with a friend, it genuinely helps us keep producing these in-depth explorations.
It's the fuel that lets us keep digging into these subjects.
Definitely. All right, so let's start with the physical constraints of the medium. We talk a lot about breaking the rules in art, but...
You can't break a rule you don't understand.
Exactly. You can't build a beautiful cantilevered roof on a house if you haven't calculated the load-bearing capacity of the foundation.
And the grid is that foundation.
Right. The source material defines it pretty simply. It says a grid is a structure to help the designer make decisions about the placement of elements.
Which, sounds incredibly dry on the surface.
Very dry.
A grid is just a series of intersecting vertical and horizontal lines. But the author emphasizes this critical pitfall that traps almost every novice designer.
The one-size-fits-all fallacy.
Yes. There's this massive temptation to find a grid system that just looks nice and then forcefully apply it to every single project you ever touch.
Like a template.
Right. But a grid is not a blanket. It's a bespoke suit. It has to be tailored to the exact needs of the content.
And the specific media delivering that content. Right?
Exactly.
Because I always assumed a grid was just a way to keep things tidy, like a column is a column.
A lot of people think that.
But you're saying the physical environment where the design actually lives changes the architecture of the grid itself.
Oh, fundamentally. Consider a cookbook.
Okay, a cookbook.
If you're designing a physical hardback cookbook, you have to account for the physical environment of a kitchen.
Right. There's flour everywhere, oil.
Exactly. The book will likely be lying open on a counter. The user's hands are a mess. So the designer might choose a modular grid with massive, generous outer margins.
Oh, I see.
Those margins aren't just empty space to look pretty. They are designated physical safe zones.
So the cook can grab the book without smudging the recipe text.
Precisely. It's about ergonomics.
That makes so much sense.
Now, take that exact same recipe, the exact same text and photos, and design it for a digital app.
Oh, totally different environment.
Right. That generous physical margin is suddenly entirely useless. In fact, it's detrimental on a 5-inch smartphone screen.
Because you're just wasting tiny screen real estate.
Exactly. For the app, the designer abandons the printed grid entirely. They rely on a fluid, 12-column responsive grid.
Which can dynamically rearrange everything.
Right. The ingredients list, the instructions, depending on whether the user's holding their phone vertically or horizontally.
Wow. So the content didn't change one bit.
Not a single word.
The medium changed, and therefore the structural foundation had to completely transform.
Exactly. That shifts the designer's role from a decorator to a structural engineer. You have to anticipate human interaction.
That is fascinating. And to really cement this, the author provides a brilliant autopsy of a basic grid.
They do, yeah.
They take a very specific physical object, a 6x9-inch, 200-page, perfect bound book, and they just deconstruct the invisible cage holding it together.
And for anyone unfamiliar with the terminology, perfect bound just means the pages are gathered together, the spine edge is ground flat, and strong adhesive glues the pages directly to the wraparound cover.
It's basically the standard paperback novel on your shelf.
Exactly.
So let's walk through the anatomy of this specific book, starting from the outside edge of the paper and moving inward.
Okay.
The first structural element is the outer margin. The author specifies a 0.5-inch outer margin for this layout.
Half an inch.
And this isn't an arbitrary aesthetic choice. The author explicitly calls this a thumb grip.
Which goes back to the physical mechanics of holding an object.
Right.
When you grasp a coffee mug, it has a handle specifically designed to keep your hand away from the scalding ceramic. When you hold a modern smartphone, there's a bezel, even a really thin one. It prevents your palm from accidentally triggering the touchscreen.
So a book requires the same ergonomic consideration.
Exactly. Your thumbs physically have to rest on the paper to hold the book open. If the designer runs the text a 1/4 inch from the edge, your thumb will literally cover the words.
You'd have to constantly shift your grip just to read a sentence.
It would be incredibly frustrating. So a 1/2 inch margin guarantees a frictionless reading experience.
Okay, so moving from the outer edge to the center of the book, we encounter the inside margin.
Technically referred to as the gutter.
Right, the gutter. And the math the author provides here is fascinatingly specific. The inside margin is set at 1.125 inches.
Seems like a very weird number.
It really does. But it's derived by taking the standard 0.75-inch margin used on the top and bottom and adding an extra 0.375 inches of space.
And why that specific addition?
Well, you tell me. Why the extra fraction of an inch?
Because of the glue.
The glue.
As we mentioned, a perfect bound book is glued at the spine. And paper has physical thickness. It has resistance.
Right, it doesn't just lay flat.
Exactly. When you force a 200-page glued book open, the pages don't lay perfectly flat like they would in a spiral-bound notebook. The paper arches.
It curves sharply downward.
Right into that tight, glued center valley of the spine.
I'm literally looking at a paperback on my desk right now, and you're right, the inner inch of the paper is completely swallowed by that curve.
It just disappears. If the designer simply mirrored the standard margin from the outside edge to the inside edge, half of the text would slide down into that dark crevice.
Oh man, you would have to physically pry the book apart with both hands. straining
the binding just to read the first few words of every line on the right page and the last few words on the left page.
That sounds miserable. So that extra 0.375 inches is a mathematical compensation for the curvature of bound paper.
That's exactly what it is.
I have to admit, calculating the physical curve of glued paper to the thousandth of a decimal point feels utterly detached from the romantic idea of graphic design.
It does, doesn't it?
It sounds like industrial manufacturing.
Well, because it is industrial manufacturing. What's fascinating here is how graphic design is fundamentally tied to the brutal, heavy machinery of the physical world.
Wow.
A designer staring at a glowing, perfectly flat retina display is looking at a beautiful lie.
A beautiful lie, I love that.
The screen implies perfection, but the factory floor delivers reality.
Which perfectly explains the most baffling element on the author's anatomy list.
The bleed lines.
Yes, bleed lines. The author dictates that if any artwork or color is meant to touch the very edge of the page, the designer must extend that artwork 0.125 inches past the final trim size.
1/8 of an inch.
Right. Why would anyone care about 1/8 of an inch of ink that is literally meant to be thrown in the trash?
Well, imagine the printing process. We are talking about a hobbyist carefully trimming a single photograph with a pair of scissors.
We're talking commercial printing.
Massive Heidelberg presses. The paper is moving at astonishing speeds. And once printed, The paper is stacked into blocks containing hundreds of pages.
Okay, I'm picturing a giant stack of paper.
Then, a massive hydraulic steel blade, basically a guillotine, comes crashing down to trim the entire stack to its final 6 by 9 inch size.
A blade that heavy, moving through that much mass, has to generate incredible force.
The floor of the print shop literally vibrates. The paper shifts imperceptibly. The blade itself might dull slightly over a run of 10,000 books, causing a microscopic deflection.
So there's zero chance it hits the exact mathematical line every time.
Zero chance. That 0.125-inch bleed is your insurance policy against industrial physics.
That makes so much sense.
If the blade cuts a fraction of a millimeter too wide and you didn't include a bleed, the reader will see a glaring, ugly white sliver of unprinted paper at the edge of the artwork.
And the illusion is ruined.
Exactly. By extending the ink past the cut line, you guarantee the color appears to seamlessly flow right off the physical edge of the object, regardless of the factory vibrations.
We are reverse engineering factory floor vibrations. This is incredible.
It's all connected.
Okay, so to round out the universal anatomy, we have the top and bottom margins, which frame the content vertically. The bottom margin is generally where you place folios, right?
Yeah, folios is just the industry term for page numbers.
Good to know. And inside the text area, we have the intercolumn space. That's the gap separating columns of text, set here at 0.25 inches.
Right, a quarter inch. And the author notes that this specific intercolumn space, combined with the margins on a 6 by 9 page, results in columns that are just over 2 inches wide.
And I'm guessing that isn't an accident.
Not at all. A 2-inch column is widely considered the optimal reading width for standard 10 or 11-point text.
Because of eye tracking.
Exactly. If a line of text is too long, the human eye suffers fatigue trying to track all the way back to the start of the next line.
Right, you lose your place.
But if it's too short, the eye has to jump back and forth too rapidly. It creates a disjointed rhythm.
Everything is interconnected. The width of the physical paper dictates the margins. The margins dictate the column width.
The column width dictates the font size.
And the font size dictates the neurological fatigue of the reader's eye muscles.
It all comes back to human biology. And tying it all together vertically and horizontally are the invisible guides.
Or hang lines.
Yes, the hang line creates a horizontal division across pages. In the author's book example, they use it to divide the page into distinct vertical thirds to consistently place chapter titles or images.
And the baseline grid too, right?
Right, the horizontal lines that ensure text aligns perfectly across columns, which is a mathematical marvel we will dissect shortly.
Oh, we definitely will. If you're listening to this, I challenge you, go to your bookshelf, pull out a paperback, and just stare at it.
Look closely at it.
Notice the thumb grip. Notice how the text gracefully avoids the gravity well of the spine. Notice the invisible 2-inch columns protecting your eyes from fatigue.
That wasn't magic.
No, that was a designer doing the math for you.
Absolutely. So, having established that physical anatomy, we step into what happens inside those margins. We move from the universal constraints to the specific structural flavors a designer can choose.
I like to call this the grid multiverse.
The grid multiverse, I like that.
But before we explore the different dimensions, we have to talk about how designers actually interact with these grids today versus how they used to.
Because it's drastically different.
The author brings up this fascinating piece of history. Grids used to be drawn by hand using non-repro blue pencils.
Oh, a magnificent tool of the analog era.
I had never heard of this before.
Well, before digital layouts, designers created what they called mechanicals. They took physical artboards and manually glued down strips of typeset text and photographs.
Wait, literally gluing paper to boards?
Literally gluing them. And to ensure everything was straight, they had to draw a grid directly onto the board with physical rulers and T-squares.
But they couldn't just use a normal pencil, right?
No, they couldn't use standard graphite pencils. Because when the board was photographed by the print shop's graphic arts camera to create the printing plates, those pencil lines would show up in the final print.
That would ruin the design. So enter the non-repro blue pencil.
Exactly. The cameras used orthochromatic film, which was highly sensitive to blue light. Therefore, a specific pale shade of blue pencil would overexpose on the negative and effectively disappear.
Wow.
Designers could draw their intricate grids heavily and darkly in blue, knowing the structural scaffolding would be completely invisible to the camera.
The implication here is profound, though. Drawing a complex grid by hand, measuring out decimal points with a ruler, it forces you to be intensely deliberate.
You don't draw a line unless you absolutely need it.
Right. You understand the purpose of every single millimeter. Contrast that with today.
It's completely different today.
You open your design software, and before you have formulated a single creative thought, a dialog box pops up suggesting default margins, default columns, default bleeds.
The software basically says, here is your grid.
And the author warns that younger designers, lacking the tactile history of the blue pencil, simply click OK,
They accept the default without questioning if it serves their specific content.
which is so dangerous. When the software makes the foundational choices, your design is compromised from the very first action.
You're letting a machine dictate your structure.
So to combat that danger of the default, the author maps out the different types of grids we can actively choose to build. Let's step into the first universe, the column grid.
The absolute classic.
It divides a page into vertical columns. It seems straightforward, but where does it really excel?
The column grid is the workhorse of visual communication. It's designed for linear flow, typically top to bottom, left to right reading.
So like magazines, newspapers, corporate brochures.
Exactly. And the brochure example in the text is a great practical application. Imagine a standard 8.5 by 11-inch piece of paper.
Right.
The designer uses a column grid to create a 3-panel brochure. But the physical folding of that paper introduces a massive complication.
Right, because paper has thickness.
You cannot simply divide an 11-inch piece of paper into 3 mathematically equal columns and expect it to fold correctly.
It won't work.
No, if you're creating a standard trifold brochure where the right panel folds inward and then the left panel folds over it like a letter in an envelope,
Okay, I'm picturing it.
that inner right panel must be slightly narrower than the other two. If it is exactly the same width, it will hit the inner crease of the left fold and the paper will buckle and bulge.
Oh, because it's fighting for space inside the fold.
Exactly. So the designer has to adjust their column grid to account for the physical fold, making the inner panel maybe a 1/16 of an inch smaller while maintaining the illusion of perfect symmetry to the reader.
That's amazing, but what if it's a different kind of fold?
Well, conversely, if you are designing a Z-fold brochure, which folds back on itself like an accordion, all 3 panels can be mathematically equal because no panel is tucking inside another.
So the column grid must map perfectly to the intended physical origami of the final product.
That's a great way to put it, physical origami.
Let's pivot to a completely different structure, the modular grid. If the column grid is like the ruled lines in a legal pad, dictating a strict top-to-bottom order,
Here's where it gets really interesting.
the modular grid is like a Japanese bento box.
I love that analogy, a highly effective metaphor. A modular grid intersects vertical columns with horizontal flow lines, creating a matrix of uniform cells, or modules.
Right. Think about a bento box. You have distinct, perfectly proportioned compartments. The rice goes in one, the pickled vegetables in another, the salmon in a third.
The flavors don't bleed into one another.
Exactly. The rigid structure maintains the integrity of each element. But it's also highly adaptable. You can remove a divider to create a larger compartment for a bigger piece of fish, and it still aligns with the overall geometry of the box.
And the modular grid provides that exact adaptability for complex information.
Yeah.
The author highlights its use in annual reports.
Or you have tons of data.
Right, a designer has to wrangle massive walls of text, complex financial charts, call-out quotes, and photography, all on a single spread.
Sounds chaotic.
It can be. But the modules allow the designer to carve out a perfect 2x2 square of cells for a pie chart, while the text flows seamlessly through the single vertical modules around it.
The text provides a fascinating example of an 18 by 24-inch poster exploring the cosmos and Albert Einstein.
Yes, that's a brilliant example.
Instead of a linear top-to-bottom flow, the designer used the modular grid to create a radial balance. The imagery and text radiate outward from the center of the poster.
Utilizing the uniform cells to maintain spatial harmony, even though the reading direction is entirely unconventional.
But the author lays down a strict law here. Stick to the grid.
You have to. The temptation with a modular grid is to start eyeballing things.
Yeah.
You place a photo and you nudge it slightly outside the module because it, feels right in the moment.
I am definitely guilty of that.
The author warns heavily against this. The power of the modular grid is its unrelenting consistency. Those uniform spatial intervals create a subconscious rhythm for the viewer.
So if you break it,
If you abandon the grid to place elements arbitrarily, the rhythm shatters, and the bento box turns into a messy pile of food.
nobody wants a messy bento box. That brings us to the rebel of the grid multiverse, the hierarchical grid.
The rebel.
To continue our special analogies, if the modular grid is a precise bento box, the hierarchical grid is the architecture of a sprawling, asymmetrical, modern art museum.
Imagine walking into the Guggenheim.
Okay.
You don't find uniform, identically sized square rooms. You walk down a narrow, compressed, curving ramp that suddenly opens up into a massive, multi-story atrium bathed in natural light, housing a single colossal sculpture.
Wow. So the architecture of the building is entirely subservient to the art it contains.
Exactly. The space adapts to the content rather than forcing the content to fit into a pre-existing box.
That is exactly how the author describes the hierarchical grid. It is asymmetrical. The columns might be drastically different widths.
It is built organically around the specific visual weight of the elements it needs to hold.
Which is why it's heavily favored in digital web design and high-end editorial layouts, right?
Yeah, it allows for breathtaking visual storytelling. You can lead the viewer's eye on a highly specific emotional journey through the page.
But the author issues a severe warning here. They state that hierarchical grids are incredibly complex to pull off. Why is this organic approach so dangerous for a novice?
Because it requires absolute mastery of visual hierarchy.
How so?
Well, when you don't have the safety net of uniform columns or modular cells, every single placement decision rests entirely on your understanding of scale, contrast, and balance.
You are manually dictating what the viewer looks at first, second, and third.
Exactly. If you lack that discipline, a hierarchical layout rapidly devolves into chaotic noise. Elements compete for attention, the viewer's eye bounces around aimlessly, and communication fails entirely.
It really is the high-wire act of graphic design.
Without a doubt.
Let's come back down to earth and look at a tool that enforces strict discipline, the baseline grid. Now, this isn't a standalone layout structure you choose instead of a column grid, right?
Correct. It works in tandem with your layout. The baseline grid is the invisible horizontal ruling that ensures every single line of text in your document sits on the exact same horizontal plane, regardless of which column it is in.
And the process the author details for setting this up in Adobe InDesign is just a masterclass in the tedious, exacting math of typography.
It's intense.
If you're listening to this while driving or cooking, do not panic about the decimals I am about to throw at you. You don't need to memorize the math, you just need to understand the intentionality behind it. Let's walk through the setup.
Okay, the process demands that your typographic decisions dictate the grid, not the other way around. Step 1. You draw a text box that fills one entire column, stretching from the very top margin to the very bottom margin.
And you fill this box with placeholder text.
Right, and the author is adamant here, print it out. Do not trust the screen. Look at the physical ink on physical paper.
Right, because the screen lies.
You adjust your font choice, the point size, and the line spacing, which is called the leading, until it is perfectly readable. Once you lock in that perfect typography, the physical counting begins.
Wait, you physically count the lines?
You literally count the lines of text in that column from top to bottom. Let's say for this specific font and spacing, you count exactly 49 lines of text.
Okay, 49 lines. Now the math. You take the total physical height of that text box, the distance between your top and bottom margin, and you divide it by 49.
Which yields a highly specific microscopic decimal value. Let's assume the math works out to 0.1939 inches per line.
You take that incredibly specific number, 0.1939. You dive deep into the software's preference menus, locate the grids panel, and you paste that exact decimal into the field labeled increment every.
And you tell the software to start this grid exactly at your top margin.
And instantly, the software draws a series of horizontal lines across your entire document, spaced exactly 0.1939 inches apart.
It's beautiful. Then you highlight every piece of text in your document and click a button that says Align to Baseline Grid.
And what happens?
The text behaves like metal shavings hitting a magnet. Every single line of text snaps forcefully down onto those invisible horizontal lines. It is an incredibly satisfying thing to witness.
I can imagine. But what's the psychological effect on the reader?
Profound stability. When reading a magazine, if the text in the left column is slightly misaligned horizontally with the text in the right column, it creates visual jitter.
Like it's vibrating almost.
Yes. The eye subconsciously notices the discrepancy. The baseline grid eliminates that jitter entirely, creating a subliminal sense of order and professionalism.
That is so cool. Okay, our final universe in the grid multiverse brings us firmly into the modern era, the responsive grid. This is the structural foundation of the digital world. It doesn't exist on physical paper, it exists in code.
Specifically, it relies on CSS media queries.
If you aren't a web developer, let me give you the incredibly simplified version of CSS media queries.
Please do.
Imagine there's a tiny invisible director living inside your web browser. This director is constantly measuring the physical width of the window, and you have given this director a script.
A bed of instructions.
Right. The script says, hey, if the screen is wider than 1,000 pixels, show the user a sprawling 12-column layout. But if the user shrinks the window or looks at this on a narrow smartphone, immediately trigger a breakpoint.
Collapse those 12 columns into a single vertical column so the text doesn't become impossibly tiny.
Exactly. That is the essence of responsive design. The grid dynamically rebuilds itself based on the physical constraints of the viewport.
The author uses a visual example of a 12-column grid. On a narrow mobile phone, a headline might span all 12 columns, stretching edge to edge. But when viewed on a wider tablet, that same headline might be restricted to span only 8 columns.
Which goes back to our earlier point about optimal reading width. If a line of text stretches across a massive desktop monitor, the reader's neck will cramp trying to read it like they're watching a tennis match.
Exactly. But what's really fascinating here is the psychology of responsive design. It contains a deeply hidden, brilliant nuance regarding typography. The author points out that responsive grids don't just react to screen size, they react to physical reading distance.
This detail completely rewired how I think about digital design.
It's brilliant. Consider the ergonomics of devices. A mobile phone is small and light. The average human naturally holds it about 10 to 12 inches away from their face.
What?
A tablet, however, is significantly larger and heavier. It is naturally held further away, resting on a lap or propped on a table, usually 12 to 14 inches from the eyes. Desktop monitors are often 2 feet away.
So the distance from the retina to the glass is constantly changing.
Exactly. Therefore, a brilliant responsive design doesn't just shuffle columns around. The CSS media queries are programmed to actively increase the font size on the tablet version compared to the mobile version.
Wait, it actually makes the font bigger?
Yes. It makes the text physically larger on the tablet to compensate for the increased distance between the screen and the user's face, ensuring the text hits the retina at the exact same perceived scale.
We are using code to dynamically respond to the anatomical arm length of the human holding the device.
It is a stunning intersection of technology and biology.
It really is. So we have explored the anatomy and we've mapped the multiverse of available structures. Now we must transition from the empty scaffolding to the actual building materials. Section 3, Content and Hierarchy.
Let's get into it.
You have selected your grid, now you have to fill it. And the author lays down a rule that sounds obvious but is violated constantly. Consider your content first.
Such a crucial rule.
You must read the text. You must look at the photography. You have to immerse yourself in the material before you draw a single line.
The author uses a great phrase, never be surprised by your content. They equate it to painting yourself into a corner.
I can vividly imagine the scenario. A novice designer gets a new assignment. They are thrilled. They spend 3 days crafting this breathtaking, image-heavy modular grid. It's perfectly balanced.
They're so proud of it.
Right. They present the empty template, feeling incredibly proud, and then the client hands them a 5,000-word academic essay with 0 photographs and 40 dense footnotes.
It is a total architectural collapse because the designer prioritized form over function.
The grid must serve the content.
If you are handed brilliant, evocative copy, your grid must prioritize typography and reading flow. If you are handed stunning architectural photography, your grid must step back and provide massive unobstructed canvases for those images.
Once you understand the nature of your content, you must establish the layout hierarchy. This goes all the way back to our opening hook about how humans behave like scanning predators.
Right, choreographing that scan.
The author demands that you actively choreograph the user's journey. You have to decide. Where do the viewer's eyes land first? Where do they travel second? And crucially, where do they exit the page?
It is a deliberate manipulation of visual weight. You provide a massive landing pad, perhaps a high-contrast photograph, or a giant headline.
Just to hook them.
Once you capture their attention, you use scale, color, and alignment to build a breadcrumb trail, leading their eye naturally down through the subheadings and into the body copy.
To build this choreography, the author highly recommends stepping away from the screen entirely. Start with loose, fast sketches on scrap paper. Draw rectangles.
Sketch one layout where the text dominates. Sketch another where an image dominates. Figure out the structural strategy before the software tempts you with drop shadows and font menus.
And if you find yourself creatively paralyzed, the author suggests a field trip. Go to a physical bookstore.
Deconstruction is one of the most powerful learning tools available. You don't go to a bookstore to steal a layout. You go to reverse engineer success.
I love that, reverse engineer success.
You find a magazine spread that stops you in your tracks, and you ask yourself why it stopped you. How did the designer create that emphasis? How did they manipulate the grid to force your eye to that specific quote?
You dissect their hierarchy to understand the mechanics beneath the aesthetic.
Exactly.
As you build this hierarchy, the text emphasizes a critical organizational principle, grouping related elements. The author insists you must anticipate the audience's needs and group items by function, by type, or by frequency of use.
Like that bento box we talked about.
Exactly. If you are designing an e-commerce checkout page, all the payment buttons and security badges must live in the exact same visual quadrant. If you are designing a travel brochure, group all the weekend getaways under $500 together in a distinct sidebar.
You are reducing the cognitive load on the user. You are making the search process efficient.
But I have to bring up a real-world scenario that creates massive friction here. I know designers face this daily.
Oh, I know what you're going to say.
You build a beautiful hierarchy, the main headline is large, the secondary text is small, everything is perfectly grouped. You show it to the client and the client says, I love it, but the secondary text is really important, make it bigger. Oh, and the logo needs to be huge. And this small photo in the corner, that's our CEO, make that massive too.
The classic client feedback.
What happens when the client demands that everything is important?
That is the eternal battle of visual communication. But the unyielding law of human perception is this. When everything is emphasized, nothing is emphasized.
The author warns designers not to let their design ego dictate the response here.
Yes. The author candidly shares that as a young designer, they often prioritized aesthetics over usability. They wanted the page to look cool.
We've all been there.
But grouping elements and enforcing strict hierarchy isn't about flexing your artistic muscles. It is about serving the user. If a client demands everything be huge, the layout turns into a room full of people screaming at the top of their lungs simultaneously.
That sounds awful.
The user experiences overwhelming noise, cognitive overload, and they instantly tune out. The designer's fundamental job is to politely but firmly advocate for the user's sanity.
To understand the pain of bad hierarchy, you don't need a design degree. Think about a poorly designed restaurant menu. We have all experienced this nightmare.
Oh, definitely.
You sit down at a diner and they hand you a massive laminated menu. It is absolute chaos. The prices are scattered seemingly at random.
Buried in the text.
The dietary information, the little icons for gluten-free or vegan, are buried inside dense, italicized paragraphs describing the sauce. The appetizers are mixed in with the side dishes. Entire sections are inexplicably highlighted in neon yellow.
It is a total failure of grouping and hierarchy.
It is infuriating. You have to aggressively hunt just to figure out how much a hamburger costs. It elevates your stress levels before you've even ordered a drink.
Nobody wants that.
That frustration, that friction you feel, that is exactly what your audience feels when you fail to group related elements and establish a clear visual path. Good design is fundamentally an act of empathy. It prevents that frustration.
Good hierarchy is a courtesy to the reader's time and mental energy.
Well said. All right, we are entering the final phase of the deep dive. We have built the grid, we have analyzed the content, and we have established the hierarchy. Now, how do we transform a functional layout into a professional, trustworthy, and emotionally resonant piece of communication? We polish it. Section 4, the art of consistency, alignment, and white space.
The author begins this section with a powerful lesson on restraint, drawn from a painful college critique.
What happened?
The author recounts how they would start a multi-page project with a strong grid and a carefully selected typeface. But by page 3 or 4, they would get bored.
Bored of their own design.
Yes. They felt the need to be expressive. So they would arbitrarily abandon the grid, change the column widths, and introduce completely random new fonts just to fill up empty space.
They viewed every blank page as a new stage to perform a completely different act.
Exactly. But the harsh feedback they received was that these micro decisions, making a headline slightly larger on page 4 just because there was extra room, are completely forgettable.
They don't register as creativity.
No, they do not register as creativity to the reader. They register as amateurish inconsistency. They create visual static.
To illustrate why absolute consistency is the prerequisite for powerful design, the author deploys one of the most brilliant analogies I have ever read. They compare a well-designed document to a professional fireworks show.
That's a great analogy.
Imagine you were standing along a river watching fireworks explode over a city skyline. When the show starts, they do not ignite every single explosive at the exact same moment.
That would be one blinding, deafening flash, and the show would be over in 2 seconds.
Exactly. Instead, the pyrotechnicians establish a pace.
A deliberate cadence. You see the rocket launch, you hear the sharp whistle, the loud boom, and the burst of color.
The show builds a rhythm. Boom, boom, boom. They might introduce different colors or slightly different shapes, but the underlying timing and structure remain remarkably consistent.
And as an audience member, you settle into that rhythm. You become comfortable with the rules of the display.
But then, the rhythm stops.
The crucial pause.
The sky goes completely dark, the booming stops. The silence stretches on for 3, 4, 5 seconds. You strain your eyes, you wonder, is it over? Did something break?
That silence builds immense tension.
Unbearable tension. And then, without warning, the screaming whistle of a massive rocket rips through the air and the grand finale detonates. The sky is filled with chaotic, overlapping, blinding explosions. It is breathtaking.
So how does that map to the architecture of a page?
Your baseline grid, your strict 2-inch columns, your disciplined use of only 2 typefaces across 40 pages, that is, the rhythmic boom, boom, boom of the standard fireworks.
You need that boring repetition.
You desperately need that boring, repetitive consistency. Why? So that you can hold your powder. You establish the rules so firmly in the reader's subconscious that when you finally choose to break the grid strategically.
Perhaps by introducing a massive, full-bleed photograph that obliterates the columns entirely.
It hits the reader with the emotional impact of a grand finale.
It is the contrast that creates the power. If you are constantly breaking the rules on every single page, there is no rhythm. There is no tension. It is just a constant barrage of noise.
When you try to deliver the grand finale, the audience is already numb.
Absolute consistency is the only mechanism that makes breaking the rules meaningful.
Alongside that consistency is the demand for strict alignment. The author delivers a fantastic rule of thumb here. If 2 elements are kind of aligned, go ahead and align them fully. Failing to do so can look like a mistake.
This touches on the psychology of trust.
Trust, really?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
If a reader is looking at a corporate report and the headline is misaligned with the body copy by just a millimeter, their brain registers that discrepancy as a physical error. It looks sloppy.
And if the visual container is sloppy?
The subconscious mind instantly assumes the data inside the container is also sloppy. Perfect alignment implies precision, care, and authority.
Which brings us to the final and undoubtedly the most terrifying design element for a novice: white space.
The dreaded white space.
The author literally pleads with the reader, stating, if there's one thing I want to tell you about white space, it's not to forget to use white space.
Why does empty space induce so much panic?
It's the wasted real estate anxiety. When a novice looks at a blank 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, they think, I paid for all this paper. I need to extract maximum value by putting ink on every square millimeter.
Or a CEO buys a full-page magazine ad for $10,000.
And demands the designer make the logo bigger and fill the corners with extra text to get their money's worth. They view white space as a void, as a missed opportunity.
But the cognitive science of visual processing dictates the exact opposite. White space, often called negative space, is not empty. It is a highly active structural element.
It provides breathing room.
Yes, the visual breathing room that allows the brain to process information without suffocating.
Let's make this highly practical. Imagine a client brings you a desperately cramped, claustrophobic company newsletter.
A dense brick of anxiety.
Exactly. The text runs edge to edge, the photos are crammed together, it's awful. The author provides 7 specific techniques to inject white space and rescue the design. Instead of just listing them, let's apply them to this terrible newsletter. Where do we start?
The fastest rescue operation is expanding the borders. Increase the outer margins of the entire page and increase the padding around every single image.
Force the content inward to create a protective moat of calm white paper around the chaotic information.
Immediately, it feels less aggressive. Next, we attack the typography. We adjust the leading the vertical space between the lines of text.
By simply adding a fraction of a millimeter of white space between the lines, the dense brick of text suddenly becomes airy and readable.
We also ditch the traditional paragraph indents. Instead of indenting the first line, We insert a full blank line of space between every paragraph.
We are creating mini rest stops for the reader's eyes.
We can also widen the gutters, the intercolumn spaces. Pushing the columns slightly further apart reduces the chance of the reader's eye accidentally jumping across the gap into the wrong sentence.
Then we break up the endless gray wall of text. We introduce bold subheadings and bulleted lists,
These elements naturally carve out asymmetrical chunks of white space above and below them.
which instantly makes the newsletter scannable. We are catering directly to the predatory scanning behavior we discussed at the very beginning.
And regarding the images, instead of trying to cram a mosaic of 5 tiny, heavily bordered photos into the layout, we delete 4 of them.
Just get rid of them.
We use one single large striking image. Paradoxically, the single large element creates much more surrounding white space than the clutter of multiple small elements.
And the final technique requires the most confidence of all. Simply leave a corner blank.
Just empty space.
Don't put a logo there. Don't add a meaningless graphic. Have the bravery to let a portion of the layout remain entirely untouched.
That vast expanse of nothingness acts like a spotlight, forcing the user's attention exactly onto the elements you did choose to include.
Using white space requires the maturity to realize that what you intentionally leave out of a design is just as powerful as what you put in.
Well said.
We have journeyed deep into the invisible matrix of design today. Let's trace our path back out.
It's been quite a journey.
We started by grounding ourselves in the harsh physical realities of the grid, understanding that elements like the 0.375-inch inner margin and the 0.125-inch bleed are necessary defenses.
Defenses against the curvature of glue and the violent vibrations of industrial cutting blades.
We explored the multiverse of structural choices, from the linear flow of column grids and the bento box adaptability of modular grids to the avant-garde architecture of hierarchical layouts.
And the satisfying mathematical precision of the baseline grid.
We uncovered the hidden brilliance of responsive grids, learning how CSS media queries use typography to actively compensate for the physical distance between a device and the human retina.
We established the unbreakable law that content dictates form.
And we explored the empathy required to group information logically, saving our audience from the nightmare of the chaotic diner menu.
And ultimately, we learned that true mastery is found in restraint.
Building the relentless rhythmic consistency of a grid, deploying alignment to build trust, and embracing the active power of white space, all so we can deliver a grand finale that actually means something.
It is a profound framework for transforming chaotic noise into elegant communication.
But as is tradition on the deep dive, we want to leave you with a final, provocative thought to mull over. Something to carry with you long after you close this audio. Something to think about.
Early in our discussion, we talked about the history of the non-repro blue pencil. We talked about how drawing a grid by hand, physically calculating every measurement, forced the designer into a state of intense, deliberate intentionality.
The physical friction of the tool forced the mind to evaluate the necessity of every single line.
Today, we possess software that can generate a 12-column, mathematically flawless, fluidly responsive layout in the literal blink of an eye. The defaults are handed to us effortlessly.
It's almost too easy.
So the question I want to leave you with is this. In an era of absolute digital convenience, are we accidentally outsourcing our intentionality to the machine?
When the software removes all the friction of foundational choices, do we stop thinking about the why?
The next time you open a blank digital canvas and that little dialog box pops up asking you to accept its default margins, pause. Ask yourself, is the software making the design choices right now, or are you?
A critical question for anyone creating anything in the digital age. Thank you for joining us on this exhaustive exploration of the invisible scaffolding that shapes our visual world. We hope this deep dive fundamentally changes the way you look at every book you hold, every magazine you flip through, and every website you scroll.
I know it changed my perspective.
If you found value in this journey, please remember to support the channel, like, subscribe, and share it with someone who loves to know how things work. We will be back soon with more deep dives into the hidden mechanics of creation. Until then, stay curious,